Hi everyone, Amir Nooriala, one of the co-CEOs here at Co-CEO Information Security. We're just about to start another episode of In Conversation. Today's guest is brilliant. We've got Tony Pepper. You'll know him in recent times as one of the co-founders and CEO of Egress that he ran for 17 years before selling it to KnowBe4. Actually, that's his second exit. He also was part of the founding team at Reflex, which after two acquisitions got bought by Checkpoint. So we're going to be talking about not just the cybersecurity market as a whole, talking about his career and journey as a founder and CEO twice in the cybersecurity industry, as well as the annual phishing trends report, which just came out. I'll be diving into some of the fascinating stats that have come out of that report as well. Welcome to the In Conversation series by Co-CEO Information Security. I'm Amir Nooriala, one of the co-CEOs at Co and the host for today's episode. Tony, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, I'm going to slightly embarrass you as one of our guests by reading a short bio about yourself and explaining why you're on this episode. So, Tony, you are the founder and CEO of Egress, founded in 2007. And previous to that, you are part of the team that sold Reflex to PointSec. And I think PointSec was then bought by Checkpoint. And then from there, you came up with the idea of Egress, 17 years there. And then you sold the business last year to KnowBe4, who are the world leader in security awareness training. In terms of Egress itself, for those of you not familiar, Egress is a market leader in email security with its defend, prevent, and protect product modules. And the reason why actually we're going to have this conversation today is, when was it? It was March. So yeah, pretty recently, March 2025, Egress released their annual Phishing Threat Trends report. I've gone through that report, so you don't have to. I've written down a bunch of really interesting stats and snippets that I saw in that report, and I thought we'd quiz Tony about that. So Tony, welcome.
Great to see you again.
Should we jump in?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right, brilliant. So, actually, before I do that, I'm going to contradict myself. Before we jump into the report, if it's okay, I'm just going to ask a few questions about yourself and your journey. So you started your Egress with your business partners, Neil and John. Would you mind talking about yourselves as a team, what the original mission was, and how 17 years later it became what was sold to KnowBe4?
Long time ago, that.
Yeah.
I was a younger man back then.
I had hair, yeah, absolutely.
Look, when we wrapped up the first business, which had its roots in USB device management and control. So if you remember back in sort of mid 2000s, the concern was around people transferring really sensitive content to USB removable media and hard drives.
Yep.
If you remember, like people running around with those kind of stuff. At trade shows, you'd be picking up all these kind of memory sticks and wow, this one's 32 meg or 64 meg. I remember as the marketing team buying them, and it still cost a fortune back then.
I've got a bag of them at home.
Right, yeah. So the concern back then was content that was copied to removable media and then in an unauthorized fashion, or even if you were using devices to kind of walk around, you might lose them on the subway, or you might kind of drop them in the street, and or actually introduce harmful content into the business via removable media. So that was the problem we were solving back then. But we kind of felt in the new business then that problem would change, and we'd move away from storage and carrying around data on devices, which of course we did, to more electronic means of sharing content, of sharing information. But we felt that the challenges of introducing harmful content or taking away unauthorized content, so malicious actors, and also the privacy concerns about that was no different, but just in a digital world. So we wanted to kind of do that. And when you kind of think about that, we logically thought, well, how do we share content today digitally? And well, the obvious way was email, right? But if you think about email back in sort of 2008, 2009, it was just really hard to use it. Well, it was easy to use if you were just sharing content by email in an unsecured fashion. And actually the controls around protecting what was landing in your inbox or what you could do with email was it was open. So we just felt there was a huge opportunity to disrupt that space through technical controls. So that's kind of where we kind of started. It was really simple as that.
Okay. And then how about the mix of the team? Like, what were the roles you guys had? How did it all work together?
All backgrounds in sort of tech sales, pre-sales, post-sales,
Right.
just super close, close to the customer. I think like every startup, I think you have a thesis, you have an idea, but ultimately you enable and work with your customers to go on a journey, right? So all of us we started the business primarily with engineers who are actually going to build the tech, and then just a really small crew of people that would then take it to market and then iterate. So we started right out of the gate in sort of the tail end of 2007. So over a 17-year journey, it's amazing how you round up years. I mean, you sort of lose time, right? So if we say, round about 2008, it was really just how do we build stuff quickly and then bring our MVP to market, which again took longer because tech took longer to build that days. This was in the time where whether you were coding in C or C#, it wasn't like today where actually you could ask ChatGPT to actually like code me some stuff and bring it to market real quick. Everything just took a little bit longer. So it took us quite a while to iterate to bring our first product to market, which we did in, I guess, early to mid 2010.
All right, brilliant. Well, I mean, I'm impressed you can even think that far back. I forget what I did 2 days ago, to be honest with you. So that's a great start. So the big announcement was last year. Obviously you announced, I think, and then had to close a few months later, and you sold the business to Novafor around July. 17 years. I mean, that's from baby to grown adult.
Yeah.
And you hand that over to someone else, a bit like when they move out of the house the first time. How was that?
It's tough, right? And I think if you ask any founder, how will they feel in that moment? How will they choose the right partner? I don't think you can ever visualize the perfect partner, because it's such a big deal. How you can't quite imagine a place where you would feel that it's a natural home. So you just continue to go on a journey. You just focus on building the business. But the reality is, I always wanted to be dragged off the market.
Right.
We were growing like crazy. Our growth rate was increasing.
Yeah.
The way we were thinking about the world and developing our platform was at its height. And I always wanted to find a situation where almost everyone in the business would be disappointed, actually, that the announcement of acquisition was put across the business. And I think that's kind of almost to some extent where we were, because we were so confident about our journey and we're committed with kind of direction we were heading. The reality is, though, frustratingly, it was a perfect fit, really, because if you think about the last 5 years, in particular with cloud email security and how it's developed and evolved, and you think about how security awareness and training has developed and evolved, the two are sort of merging closer and closer together. And almost in every one of our customer engagements, we were leveraging the SAT platform that customers were using to almost demonstrate the value that we were returning. So what kind of phishing attacks, what kind of behavioral based attacks we're getting through your native controls, what is your click rate, what's your engagement rate, and we were leveraging and using that to demonstrate when you put in our platform how we could reduce that and et cetera. So it just felt natural to kind of bring together. And unlike many of the acquisitions you see, and we've had a bunch of our competitors that have fallen foul of this trap, where really it's a competitive takeout.
Yeah.
You do something better than us. We want to bring your business into our business and almost reinvigorate the business with the tech. So it's really a tech play rather than a customer play. This was different. Novafor had never played in any other space other than security awareness and training. So they were just uber focused, laser focused on being the market leader in security awareness training and now human risk management. We were laser focused in cloud email security. So bringing those together, it did feel like this is a best of breed capability to then really combine security awareness and training with technical controls around detection and prevention, and actually then offer something a little bit different in the market. So
and were you looking for a strategic home, or did you just get really lucky that the person that approached you was actually strategic for it?
I think when you're growing a business beyond a certain size and scale, I think you're always aware of what options are available. It's either be part of something really big to then take it to the next level, or it's to continue to raise. And I think they're the two paths. You can't stand still. You certainly can't. You can grow organically to an extent. We'd already acquired a business a few years ago, and that for us was really quite transformational. So it was either go on a journey where we continue to acquire and we continue to raise, but really up the stakes, or ultimately partner with a strategic and go to market together. And actually the timing just worked out great that it ended up being the latter, really.
Do you mind sharing? I mean, I'm getting a bit nosy here, and is not quite what we agreed to discuss, but I just find it really interesting. Do you mind sharing like how long you guys were talking before you agreed to actually do a transaction?
Oh, for sure. Probably almost 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of our investors would say to me many, many years ago, businesses are bought, not sold. Yeah. And while that's a great playbook one-liner, which we sometimes get a lot from investors, ours are much more thoughtful. But how do you actually deliver that in practice? How do you become ultimately bought, not sold? And I think that's through strategic partnerships and understanding where the bi-directional value is. So when we launched our own human risk management dashboard that sat on top of our telemetry about what we were seeing through the flow of email, the essence of that was partnering. So our first partner in being able to join up the dots between cloud email telemetry, inbound and outbound, and security awareness and training telemetry was KnowBe4. We also partnered with CrowdStrike, and we also then partnered with several others as well. And actually what came out in that technical partnership, so we launched a technical partnership where we were taking their data and bringing it into our platform, and then they were taking our data and bringing it into their platform, so that both pieces of technology were stronger together, but as a technical partnership. And as that started to evolve from a tech partnership to a go-to-market partnership, then before you know it, suddenly investors start to talk, leadership start to talk, and it evolved into what is now become a platform
relation. Okay, makes perfect sense. And another thing you just touched upon was about that strategic fit and I guess consolidation platform-wise between email security and security awareness training. It seems like there's a lot of that happening in the market. I think Mimecast for a while has had their version of kind of awareness training and phishing that can be done with their email platform. Abnormal, one of the new entrants in the market, seems to be thinking of launching that side as well. And then you guys have now strategically kind of put two platforms together. Do you think this is going to be kind of table stakes that everyone has to have now? The email security has to be fully integrated with the phishing, with the training, with the dashboards, all the rest of it. Do you think that's where the market is?
I do, yeah. And I think, when you think about the different product categories, you're dead right, Amir. It was security awareness and training, now HRM, if you like. Yeah. It was cloud email security, and there were separate product categories with their own Gartner quadrants, with their own Forrester waves. I think that is changing, and that is metamorphosizing into something different, whereby customers want joined up solutions. And I think integration is not enough. I think because where do you draw the line between educating your employees around risk and then catching risk, and how do you educate them as close to the moment of risk where you actually make a meaningful dent on the threats that we see in the world? So I think I don't see a place anymore in 2 to 3 years, 2 to 5 years, where there is email security and security training and awareness. I just think those are just becoming one and the same problem statement, while yet in business they're still owned in very different spaces, so but I think that you're going to see it coming together. What will drive that is the market consolidating, and how deeply integrated those two things become. But I think for years, the technologists have argued it's a technical solution to the problem. So you solve this with technical controls that can detect and prevent advanced behavioral threats. And then you've got the education community that are saying, look, you'll never catch 100% of the threats. You'll need to educate employees on a much wider scale. I think both of us have always kind of, to some extent, argued against each other. In reality, it is both.
It's all above. Yeah.
It's got to be. You can't just awareness training on its own is not enough, and just technical controls either at the boundary or at the endpoint are not enough. You got to merge these two together.
Okay, makes perfect sense. I think that's a good segue. Now let's jump into the phishing trend report. So a lot of people in the market wait for this annual report to come out, but it just shows the movement in the threat landscape around phishing. So what I've done is I've tried to go through some of this and distill it and ask you kind of why do you think these trends are happening. So for example, the report highlights a notable increase in phishing emails. So the stat I've got here, between September 24 and February 25, so what is that, 5-6 month period, there's a 17.3% increase in phishing emails compared to the previous 6 month period. What do you think is driving that increase in phishing?
Well, I think the first thing is the toolkits available now to spin up quite a sophisticated attack are just readily available on the dark web.
Yeah.
And it's actually a business now. I mean, crime as a service is a business model, just like we have our own business models. So whereas maybe even 12 months ago, or certainly longer, it would take a level of expertise actually to spin up a phishing campaign. And it would take a level of expertise to deliver that phishing campaign. And, you know, the days of they're badly worded, it's fairly easy to spot with the human eye. And they were kind of caught by the native controls. Maybe those days have gone. I think it is significantly easier. In fact, there are templated attacks that are readily available for you. And what's really scary is at super low cost. You know, we're talking under $100. You know, you can, and actually, just like a business, you've got a phishing pack ready to go, best practices ready to go, supply chain to help deliver that, almost statistics around success rate and open rate, just like you and I would have sort of statistics around when we look at our own business and how effective it is.
Or a marketing campaign.
A marketing campaign,
track your click-through rates.
Of course, it's exactly the same.
Criminals can do the same.
Criminals are doing the
phishing.
same. It is a business model. And what's interesting is there's a supply chain in that business model too. So there are those that create really awesome campaigns and templates, but they will not be the ones as part of the supply chain to deliver. Then ultimately, they're all designed to do fundamentally the same thing, which is harvest credentials. But once they've got credentials, it then moves on to the other part of the supply chain, which is, well, I've got credentials now. I'll sell them to another part of the supply chain that will deliver a harmful payload, which is where ransomware comes in. So I think the reality is it's quite a sophisticated business now that actually is completely different to that was not just 6 months ago, but 12. But the really frightening thing is it's just the speed of development is exponential. And that's why you are seeing just the sheer volume, but the volume isn't the scary thing, which is just natural. It's the sophistication plus the volume. And I think that's where you're seeing the real
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I think I was reading, maybe I was listening to something last week, but they were saying the phishing toolkits that you can now get from dark web have got to the point where you can actually get SaaS, where you just pay a monthly fee and it's an all-in-one platform that will do the phishing for you.
End to end,
You just need to say where it wants to target. And so that kind of fits into my next stat here, which is when I compared the reports, as in the one that just came out, to the previous one, there seemed for the first time a heavy mention of AI. And you just said AI as well. So the AI was pretty much in every paragraph of the report. And one of the things that stood out was AI-powered polymorphic phishing. So basically, every email that's sent out is actually slightly different. So you're not mass flooding one domain with the same phishing email. Everyone is literally slightly different, making it harder to detect. And the stat I have in the report is that in 2024, 76.4% of attacks contained at least one polymorphic feature. So they're already 3/4 of the attacks, using AI to differentiate them. And then 73.8% of them, in terms of the actual phishing emails, showed use of AI as well in them. Again, maybe you've already answered this, but do you think this is that comes down to just the technology has moved so quickly, but not only has it moved, but just like you just said, it's been packaged.
Right. It is. And actually, when you think about the use of AI in this context, it's everything you've just said, right, mate? It's about personalization.
Yeah.
And if you think about how traditional defenses have looked at trying to provide guardrails against attacks, it's templated, right?
Yeah.
What does bad look like? And then how can we then apply what bad looks like to something we see to then block it? But if something is subtly different every time, if something is personalized both in its language, it's suddenly not templatized.
Correct.
And that's the essence of AI. If you think about how the world ultimately is using the most obvious use case for AI in all the different LLMs that's been used right now, it's ultimately to personalize something, right? Give me something that I can use, even throw in a bit of language in there, summarize it, I'd templatize it, and then maybe I can then use that across my business. Well, that's no different for this. It's back to that point I mentioned before about the language used in phishing templates and attacks even a year ago. The human eye could spot it. We'd like to think as security professionals we'd spot it, but actually anyone would spot it. It's just badly worded.
Yeah.
Those days are long gone. in the sense that the wording, the social engineering behind the hook, the social engineering behind the ask, the sense of urgency, and personalized to you as an individual about something that you would expect to see. It's much harder now to spot, and not only to spot as the human eye, so you then engage with it. It's also very difficult for the traditional perimeter defenses to spot it, because ultimately they're just looking for known bad. So that's why it's so difficult now using polymorphic. Actually, it's the only way now. Using polymorphic technology and polymorphic attacks is the only way to ultimately personalize an attack, to then start to nurture someone individually through that social engineering, especially with using a compromised account. So you can't, it's not even when you look behind the email headers, it's not like it's coming from a Hotmail account or a Yahoo account. It's coming from the actual domain, and it's personalized. It's just very difficult to spot.
So I mean, listening to that, you're telling me personalized, en masse, in volume attacks. That's pretty terrifying. A lot of our listeners in conversation series are cybersecurity professionals. They're listening to this to kind of educate themselves. What's happening in the market? What should I be doing? That kind of thing. I'm listening to this thinking I need to buy loads of underwear, because this is terrifying. Am I understanding this correctly? Like, is it literally going to be this scary?
Look, it's a tough space to operate in, because it's moving so fast, and I don't think anyone would have the bravery when you're on the cyber side to ultimately say that we've won. I think you've just got to, each day you'll win, and then maybe the next day you'll lose, and it's a cat and mouse game. And I think what we're trying to do in the cyber, in our universe, and certainly a bunch of suppliers in our space, is to try and find a way to understand zero-day attacks, try and find a way to sort of move away from the traditional ways of spotting anomalies in behavior, and so that it can scale rather than just reinventing the wheel almost every 5 seconds. But it's tough. It's a difficult space to operate in, and it is changing all the time. In the same way as the attackers are using AI at scale, I think the defenders are also using AI at scale. So, but this isn't just a buzzword about AI versus AI. This is around how do we legitimately build capability that looks for abnormalities in behavior, both inbound and outbound, and how do we surface that? How do we then ultimately surface and get the efficacy right? Because it's easy, right, to kind of to almost apply a rule that even if there's a small degree of doubt, then quarantine. The challenge with email is it's a mission critical application, and having operated in this space for 15 plus years, the propensity and the level of desire in a business to have even the smallest degree of A, downtime, or B, delay is non-existent. So there's no appetite for delay, because it can disrupt business. You can imagine the stuff that you do on a daily basis on email. I mean, if you're working with a business, or if you're looking to invest in a business, if you're acquiring a business, if something doesn't come through because it's been quarantined, because actually there was a sense of urgency around a particular deal that you're working on, and actually there was a sort of tone of voice that wasn't usual from this particular individual, what's to say that that account hasn't been compromised, and we're not quite sure? There is a huge degree of uncertainty in that. But what's your appetite for that to be shelved? And then is the SOC overwhelmed with looking at those that fall in the grey? It's easy. The stuff that's in the black and white's easy. But I think the grey is so much more of a bigger space now. And yet the appetite is low for business disruption. So that in that sort of Venn diagram is where it becomes difficult between efficacy on detecting threats with the grey and business productivity. And I don't think we'll ever say we've got it absolutely right. But I think we're trying to get the balance right, I suppose.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. Jumping back into some more stats in the report. So I'm going to read this to you. The report also talks about, and it's a phishing report, but it talks about the resurgence of ransomware, and that there's a 22.6% increase in ransomware payloads delivered via phishing emails in a 6-month period that was measured. And it also emphasizes that the ransomware remains not only a significant threat, but is using sophisticated obfuscation, that's a tough word for me, obfuscation techniques to avoid detection. Now, I've had so many different views on ransomware and where we are with ransomware, and are the current tools enough in terms of EDR to stop ransomware, and do we need specific anti-ransomware tools? Can email cover you against ransomware, especially email combined with training? Well, what's your view on first of all, are we seeing a surge in ransomware, and what is the right approach to stop it?
I mean, this is a great question, isn't it? Because it's talked about all the time. I think ransomware has always been a threat that's existed in the world. I think the reality is it was a threat that I think a lot of people could spot quite quickly, and you could defend against it quite quickly. I think with the resurgence of email-borne attacks being more successful ultimately with businesses, and you talked about that ability to hide the payload in a mail that ultimately gets the employee to engage. I think because that's being more successful, unless you've got the right technical controls in place, then ultimately ransomware is just leveraging that as a vehicle. You're dead right. Ransomware, the primary route for ransomware is email. But ultimately you have to look at the kill chain, and you have to look prior to delivering the ransomware. There is a series of events that's taken place. And if you actually look back on that kill chain, you'll realize that you can join up the dots, and actually there will be some social profiling. There will be ultimately the ability to search where there is a level of engagement. There will be a capability where credentials have been harvested. The final step is delivering the payload. So I think we often talk about that as the issue, and it is an issue for those already compromised accounts. There will be, it's quite alarming actually how many employees in businesses are actually possibly even already compromised, but the threat actor hasn't yet delivered the payload because they're waiting for the opportune moment, really. And that's that's what keeps me up at night, is when you're working with an organization that actually recognize that they have a challenge. How far has that challenge already permeated the business? And actually that's a real concern. But the reality is, I think there is, with the statistics show that we've seen a spike because the front end of the kill chain is really that's the soft underbelly to some extent.
I mean, if I relate this back to what you said right at the start of this conversation, in terms of your thesis of why you wanted to start Egress, was that email was the most effective way of sending files digitally. It's also the most effective way of receiving malicious files
right into the heart of your business,
right?
Can you think about the world we live in now, where what other piece of technology that can you think of that all I need is your email address and I can get something right into the center of your
you're not
business.
Going to the building reception, it's going to your landing on your desk.
Right. And I can find that email address. And then you're
trusted whether you should open the package or not.
And I can find that email address through a whole bunch of series. I don't even need to ask you. I can even guess it, for that matter, based on the format of the rest of your team. So I just think it's when you think about it, is a tunnel through. Now, obviously, that tunnel is protected through a load of guardrails. But if those guardrails are not effective, those technical controls, if that education is not effective, suddenly you've now got something that is either potentially malicious, or for that matter, from an outbound perspective, it's a way of tunneling out information, inappropriately or otherwise. So I just think because of that underlying capability within mail, it represents, a significant threat.
I guess on that topic, I think the stat is that social engineering to get business email compromise is still the greatest revenue stream for cyber criminals, over ransomware even. So I think that's a really interesting touch there. Okay, going back to the report, there was a really fascinating bit it touched upon about hiring processes. I'm reading a phishing report. I did not think it would be talking about hiring processes, but what it said was that increasingly cyber criminals are exploiting hiring processes as a way to get access to systems and data, by specifically targeting those in engineering roles due to their access privileges, and finding engineers who are looking to move company. they're the more likely ones to get compromised as well. What's going on here? Like, what do we need to do about that?
It's everything you've just touched on there about that social engineering stuff, right? It's how can and we also live in a remote world, a hybrid world where hiring is, I mean, it's awesome to be here face to face having a conversation, but how much of our day is remote?
Very little, all of it.
And how many people, especially when you're scaling a business, how many organizations are hiring remote roles and actually never meet those individuals face to face? Deep fake is not hocus pocus stuff. It's not sci-fi stuff. It is very, very real. I mean, I know before the research and the work that they're doing in that space is just incredible. Just to highlight and really showcase that how simple and off the shelf. You know, it's interesting. Deepfake stuff is no different now to kind of really some of the very early and unsophisticated and expensive phishing templates and campaigns that were run. In order to stand up a situation where you could deliver a deepfake realistic conversation, it required huge firepower in terms of machine. It actually almost required a deep engineer to be able to line up the various systems, to be able to map one face onto another. The mapping also meant that even if you just during the conversation put your hand across your face, you'd lose the map and you'd start to see voids in that. Not only are they gone, but also now there's off-the-shelf executable files that you can download again from the dark web, and actually I could become you instantly. So those interviews, those conversations digitally, are now cannot be trusted by default. And when you think about bad actors, think of how do I deliver harmful capability into an organization, then social engineering via email to harvest credentials is one. Social engineering to then insert myself into your business and then launch a ransom attack from inside your organization, or even just exfiltrate data, or actually just ultimately try and understand trade secrets, is a real challenge. And I think KnowBe4's gone on record, which at the time, this was last year, at the time when this happened, I was sitting in RELT where the day that Stu Schauman announced that KnowBe4 had been compromised through the hiring process. And I was quite surprised how vocal and how public KnowBe4 were about that. But they wanted to share the lessons around how real this was, that it was state-sponsored, and actually it was part of a crime cell. That actually what they uncovered was how prevalent this was taking place, and that individuals were actually compromising hiring processes and inserting themselves in businesses, multiple businesses at any one time. And actually addresses were compromised where machines would be sent. And eventually when the law enforcement sort of entered that premises where they were very, very close with the FBI and some of the certain agencies, when they got into that apartment, it was just full of laptops. It was just full of laptops, VPNing into multiple organizations where their compromised people were residing, gathering intelligence, maybe waiting to launch an attack. KnowBe4 actually got in front of that. Not only got in front of it, so it didn't actually compromise the business. And I think it was part luck, part judgment, by the way. I think there could have been a moment there. I think it was well timed. But I think the lessons learned, and I think how public they've gone with that, it just reinforced the world we're operating in, which is, I think we do need to look at hiring processes, and I think we do need to think about how we engage differently. To some extent, almost going back to, dare I say, even old school stuff. We actually meet them face to face. I mean, how far do we go? I think a compromised hiring process is no different than a compromised account. I think it is a mechanism, it is a vehicle to ultimately gather intelligence and launch an attack from the inside. And that's a little bit scary, right? And that's where we find ourselves.
That's very scary. By the way, if anyone heard a siren in the background, we are filming this live. We are in London, so that's a real proof point for you. This is not AI generated or deep faked or anything else. Let's jump in a little bit into Egress itself, because in the report there's a stat around Let me find it in my notes. Here it is. Increasing success of cyber criminals bypassing traditional email security defenses, such as SEC, so email gateways, and/or Microsoft native security, with phishing hyperlinks using URL redirects being really effective. And the report stat is 47.3% increase in attacks evading these traditional detection methods. So I've mentioned here secure email gateways and kind of Microsoft native email security being very, very susceptible to these type of attacks. Is Egress a SEC solution? Like, how do you guys position yourself? Where do you see yourself as a type of solution?
Egress is definitely not a SEC solution.
Okay, good.
So secure email gateway, it was the traditional way that organizations would typically layer capability. Actually, it comes back to the on-premise days, actually. When before Microsoft 365, pure native cloud solution, when it was an on-premise solution, keep in mind, when we started Egress, we lived in an on-premise world. In fact, it's odd to even think that the word cloud wasn't even used in our narrative. We talked about it as a hosted platform. We were a cloud-first platform with cloud-first policy management, cloud-first key management back in 2010, before the word cloud, which is just a ridiculous even concept to think about before it was even talked about. But our big bet when we came into the market in 2010 was cloud first, key management, cloud first policy, which really was the beginning of everything. Back then, there was flashing servers in rooms, on-premise Exchange would live, and then the SEG would sit across that, basically providing a catch-all for security for on-premise Exchange. And even when that moved to the cloud, slowly over time, then those SEGs started to offer a cloud-native solution, but they were built on old legacy tech. So the SEG, in the traditional way of what it used to do, ultimately hasn't really evolved over the years. And what we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years is a different way of integrating services and delivering services. And they are integrated with either a SEG, if you're just committed to a SEG, and I think often it's the mail routing rules or the mail routing rules that makes it hard to get off a SEG. Or if you're using a SEG for archiving, that's quite sticky. It's quite difficult to get off. But you won't be using a SEG for security controls first and foremost, because ultimately both the SEGs and Microsoft 365 are there's just too much gets through because of their underlying detection. They're building on capability that is 15, 20 years old. So the newer solutions think about threats in a different way. They think about zero-day attacks. They do think about polymorphic attacks. They do obsess about business email compromise. So they have to, for those customers that have a SEG, they integrate with the SEG, and they integrate natively with Microsoft 365. I think the key difference here is they're not they're unlike a SEG, which via that MX record change, a SEG is the first entry point of a business where mail is received, and it's the delivery point where mail is sent. All of the more native integrated cloud email security solutions are not. They either leverage pre-delivery or post-delivery capability. And what that means is once it hits a SEG, if you've got a SEG, that's decreasing by the day, might add. Or if you just use native Microsoft 365 to receive email, at that point, you'll then integrate with your cloud email. So it hits Microsoft first or the SEG, then the integrated cloud email security then analyze the mail, either using SMTP transfer rules, so that would be pre-delivery, or post-delivery, i.e. where actually it's delivered to the mailbox and then using Graph API, it then takes the mail, analyzes it, and then typically moves it. So I think the biggest difference really with the SEG in many ways, other than underlying detection, it's the architecture, and it's typically leveraging Graph API versus that first point of receiver mail and that delivery point.
So what would be your takeaway? So again, cybersecurity professional watching this conversation, you've just talked through the kind of evolution of a SEG-based solution to, am I allowed to say ISIS? Is that the kind of acronym we use for it? An ISIS-based solution. What's your takeaway? What should people be thinking about? You said the word architecture. When they want to map out their 3-year, 5-year roadmap, target state architecture, email security, what should they be thinking about?
Well, so ICES, so integrated cloud email security, is a phrase that Gartner have used for many years. I actually also see that changing too, as the new Gartner Magic Quadrant was released sort of December or January of this year, where it talks about email security platforms. I think if we think about how the world's changing, if every organization typically the larger organizations leverage a SEGs, typically an enterprise play. You won't see secure email gateways leveraged in small business and mid-market businesses typically because they're quite a heavy lift.
Yeah.
And also keep in mind that the native Microsoft controls in 365 have leveled up.
Absolutely.
So actually what you will find in every organization, enterprise or otherwise, they'll be asking the question, Amir, they'll be saying, I'm leveraging Microsoft 365, probably on one of their top plans, E5 or otherwise. I've also got a SEG. What is the overlap? How effective is the SEG alongside 365? And do I need a SEG any longer, or can I leverage Microsoft 365 and its native controls and augment and fill in the gaps of 365 with a more focused, integrated play?
Yeah.
And that would be like ours and others. So I think the question will be asked, what value am I getting from a SEG?
Yeah.
And there may be legitimate reasons. There may be some reasons, but I think what you'll find is there won't be a single enterprise customer that'll be looking at the SEG saying, every single element of the SEG I get value from. They'll actually be thinking, there's probably 50% of this now that is either ineffective or I don't need.
Yeah.
So there'll be a lot of conversations around, do I remove the SEG entirely?
Yeah.
Do I remove elements of the SEG?
Yeah.
And what do I replace it with? Because what I can't do, I can't just leverage Microsoft 365 and its native controls because it's not enough. So they'll be discussing the pros and cons, both at a business level and on a cost level, of whether I remove my SEG entirely or in part and replace it with a more effective tool. Simple as that.
Brilliant. I think that's a great takeaway. Thank you so much for sharing that. Why don't we end with a couple of quick fire questions? So you're an email expert, but I believe, I consider you a cybersecurity expert in general. What takeaway, what do you think, actually, what would you think our viewers should think about outside of email related attacks? What else should they be thinking about in terms of improving resiliency?
Well, do you know what? It ties into what we've talked about throughout the session, right? I think people are our greatest strength, the greatest asset, without which we wouldn't be able to deliver what we do and achieve our collective missions, with or without the support of AI. But we're also the biggest vulnerability. We, as individuals, as people, we are fallible.
Yeah.
We do make mistakes
all the time.
we kind of screw up, and actually you know what? It's human nature to cut corners, right?
Yeah.
How do I do this faster? We're busy. We're running around. We send emails or we do activity on trains and tubes and flights and whatever it might be. And I think we are both our collective biggest asset, but there's no doubt we are our biggest risk. And I think in that that we have to think about how do we not wrap our employees up in cotton wool and almost pretend that none of these threats exist. It can't be an edge-based solution where employees just don't see anything happen there, because I think the consumer world now has integrated with the business world at home and in business. We're just aware of all these threats now. And I think, I don't know how you feel, I just don't trust anything anymore. I don't trust anything that I receive anymore. And I think equally businesses, if we wrap our employees in governance and security, the user experience sucks.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And it just makes life hard for clinicians, for lawyers, for bankers, for, we're tech guys, we love all this stuff, but equally we want to make life easy to allow them to achieve their mission. So we've got to bring them along the way. We've got to bring them on the journey. I think we have to obsess about user experience, because in a world where every business has the threat of losing an awesome employee to the next business down the road, I think employee experience is critical, and yet so is cyber. So we've got to straddle that line between employee experience and technology that enables them and helps them to be safe. So what does that mean? That means wrapping tech and training and capability around our employees that enables them to do their job, makes them aware of some of the stuff that they see, without introducing more processes and checkboxes that they say, do you know what? Life is just too hard in this business to deliver healthcare or to deliver legal services or whatever it might be. So I think you have to put the human in the center of your engagement strategy. You have to put them in the center of your security strategy.
Yeah.
You have to bring them along the journey. You have to look at tooling and capability that's really obsessed about delivering a great user experience and security, as opposed to, hey, we're really secure, but we're secure by just not delivering anything to anyone anymore. So we can't really do business. So I think we've got to just flip it on its head a little bit and bring people along with us on the journey. And that, in part, that is tools like email security, but there's a bigger picture here. It is wider engagement. It's wider awareness and training, and it's wider tools beyond cloud email security. Like I know there's guys at Sapio kind of provide it. It's a joined up strategy, but the human and the employee experience has got to be in the center. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'll be honest with you, I think users are actually fine with friction if it's explainable and they see the benefit of friction.
Definitely.
What they don't want is a bad user experience because it's just badly designed.
Definitely.
Yeah. In a previous life, I was a CEO of a bank, and when you're a CEO of a bank, you're obsessed with things like how many clicks to open an account, how many clicks to make a payment. But there were times where we're like, actually, we're going to introduce one more click, but it's going to massively reduce fraud. And actually, we think our users will be happy because they'll understand how we're protecting them. So an example would be, before that payment goes out, when you type in the account number and the sort code where you want to send the money, it would do a name check and say the name on this account you're sending to is this. It matches or it doesn't match. Are you sure you still want to send it? Yeah, and that is like a 2 or 3 second delay. But people are like, you know what? Actually, that's a fair I'm glad because I might have done it wrong, and you've saved me a big load of hassle.
Valuable friction.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think and explaining it, as long as it's explainable, I think people will be fine.
I think you've touched on something brilliant there, which is explainability and those teachable moments in the moment, as close to the point of fraud or risk. Because if it's done, even if there's a 5-10 second delay, or even if it's done outside of where you're living, that teachable moment, that explainability is lost. I think you're dead right about that explainability, but it's got to be delivered at the point of risk,
100%.
Because I think that's where we can really capture that mindset and that behavioral change.
Yeah, exactly. And then I'll give you a real example of an Egress one. I send emails to lots of people all the time, and I'll always get a pop-up every couple of days. You've never sent an email to this person when you've also emailed these other people. Are you sure you want that person on the email? And I always think, you know what? I'm glad you asked me that. I do. But I'm glad you asked me that, because you never know. And I have been known to add the wrong people on emails. Apologies to everyone who works with me. Final question. Phishing trend report. What was the most surprising thing you saw in that report?
Well, actually, as sad as it is, I wasn't surprised at all by a lot of the statistics that we've talked about today, because I do think it's a problem that unfortunately is it's tough and it's getting harder, and we need to figure it out. Actually, one of the things that did surprise me a little bit was the statistic on the percentage increase. You've already raised it in this session around the increase in attacks that are getting through Microsoft and those native controls. That's a really 47% increase. That is really scary. You would think, I mean, there'll be lots of customers listening to this particular session, and they'll be saying, why isn't this solved by Microsoft? I spend enormous amounts of time and money and energy on Microsoft. Shouldn't this be a problem that Microsoft should be able to solve for me? And being one of the biggest tech
Let's just repeat that stat, right? 47.3% increase in attacks evading traditional detection methods like SEGS and Microsoft native security. So 1 in 2 is now evading it.
Biggest security companies on the planet, been operating in the space for as long as anyone has been operating in this space. An increase of that level tells you that if you, again, crime as a service is a business. And if I want to stay in business, I have to evade Microsoft. And the traditional SEGs that include Proofpoint and Mimecast. If I can't get my attack, whether it be to harvest credentials that ultimately might be to deliver a ransomware payload, if I can't get that through those core platforms, I'm not in business. So you talked about, you used the great analogy about the marketing campaign and the click rate. If I can't get through those things, if I'm not fundamentally designed to get through those things, then I can't be in business. So when you think about it like that as a business, does it not therefore make sense that there's an increase? But But the speed of increase, though, that's a bit alarming, isn't it? Especially with, it's not like Microsoft and these businesses are doing nothing about it, but for it to increase at that level is alarming. And actually, I think it just closes the book on whether or not using Microsoft or indeed the traditional SEGs as your core controls for cloud email security, in particular for these behavioral-based attacks via email. I think the discussions has ended on that. It's not enough. We need to augment. The real question is, we've talked about in this session, what will that reference architecture look like in 12, 18, 24 months? Will one of those SEGs be non-existent anymore? But I think combining and augmenting tools on top of Microsoft 365, just like the SEG did for on-premise Exchange, is a fundamental sort of layered approach to kind of this problem.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tony, for your time, indulging my random questions about the formation of Egress, offering us such an amazing rooftop location, and putting up with what my mum would call terrible posture and slouching as well. I'm Amir Nooriala. I'm one of the co-CEOs of Sapio. We're a UK-based cyber advisory and reseller, and we work with a number of, if you use Gartner words, top right quadrant leading platforms, or Forrester far right wave if you want to use that one, Egress being one of them. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Great to meet you.